Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And today, Catherin Ryan Howard is joining us all the way from Ireland to discuss her new book, 56 Days. And just today, we got our autographed copies. You can see it right there.
I'm glad you picked a neat one.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice little stylized signature there. But I will be kind of moderating the Facebook questions or comments. So if you have questions for Catherin, go ahead and put them in at any time during the program. And I will reemerge to ask Catherin some of your questions. And then Barbara is tuning in from her home office today. And so Barbara, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Welcome, Catherin. It's a real pleasure to meet a new author.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's indeed our pleasure. I'm holding up my advanced reading copy, which I'm happy to say I got to peruse a couple of weeks ago. And this is a terrific story. Patrick has the autograph book, so we'll talk about that. I wanted to say before we start, I am wearing my Irish jacket purchased at an abbey, the name of which I can't remember, somewhere in the west of Ireland, possibly in County Mayo. If I really lean back.
And it's green, is it? It's green in color?
It is green and it's gorgeous. It's also quilted, so it's a slight bit warm for where we are, but I want it to be authentically Irish to have this discussion. Although your book is not in the west of Ireland, but rather near the Dublin city center. But
well,
anyway.
Ireland is so small that it's, it's half of one, or 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's not too far from the west, even though it's on the other side of the island.
That's true, unless you're driving and not on the motorway, in which case, Ireland has some of the scariest driving for Americans in the entire world.
I understand, because I have only driven a car for 1 year of my life, and I did it in Florida. So I don't know how to drive here. I think it must be terrifying, because you don't have roundabouts, you have very wide, well signposted roads, and we have tiny little boreens, almost, we call them. So I totally understand.
It's actually a lot of the problem are the stone walls. I can still remember my husband and I in our rental car, which my husband in a moment of madness refused to insure for piratical rates at the airport, which was a horrible mistake. In any case, we were near Galway and we drove along a road and we were driving along what looked like, some lovely ocean front and all the rest of it. And all of a sudden we ran into road building machines. And it turns out we were on a road under construction, but we couldn't tell the difference. And so he had to reverse out for 5 miles in order to get back to a main road.
That absolutely sounds like driving in the west of Ireland.
It does. But on our last visit, a year ago last May, we drove from Dublin to Ashford Castle and almost entirely on the motorway. And if you're on the motorway, it's a whole different ballgame. So
it's a lot easier on the motorway.
And the wild Atlantic Way up the west coast of Ireland is something really spectacular to drive or bike or possibly even hike a good deal of it. And that's wonderful. But we are in this book, 56 Days, over in Dublin on the East Coast, which is on the...
Where I am right now.
Oh, God. Okay, well, that was going to be my next question. So Catherin was actually born in Cork, which is to the south of Dublin, and her debut thriller, Distress Signals, was an Irish Times and USA Today bestseller and was shortlisted for the British Crime Writers Association John Creasy New Blood Dagger Award and the Irish Crime of the Year. The Liar's Girl was a finalist for the 2019 Edgar Award for Best Novel. And her third book, The Nothing Man, was a #1 bestseller in her native, I can't read today, in her native Ireland. So as you can see, she's been a smash from the very beginning. And I can certainly see why that is true after reading 56 Days, which is a compulsive read and an unusual read. So Catherin, there's a great story behind why you wrote it and why you said it where you did. So rather than me talking, why don't you tell us what that is?
Well, I think people can probably figure it out without me even telling them, but I wrote this thriller set in lockdown while I was in lockdown here in Dublin. So Ireland went into a pretty swift and severe lockdown on the 27th of March 2020. at that point, I was writing what should have been my fifth thriller, which was set in a nightclub. It was about a shooting and people were traveling internationally and all sorts was going on. And as soon as lockdown hit, it started to feel like science fiction to me, and I really struggled to continue with it. So I set it aside and I thought, I'll worry about this later. And in the meantime, for years, I had had this vague idea about a couple who meet and fall in love, but all is not what it seems. And I knew like what the truth of the story was, and I knew the book would start with their meeting, but I had nothing to go in between those 2 points. And then I heard the UK's Deputy Chief Medical Officer advise new couples to essentially put their relationship on pause or move in together in order to adhere to one of the lockdown rules, which was you weren't supposed to mix with anyone who didn't already live with you. And suddenly, there was my plot. And I thought, I'm going to write a novel set in lockdown. And it comes out tomorrow. I still don't know whether or not it was a good idea to do it. I don't know if people are going to actually want to read a novel set in lockdown. But what this book has turned out to be is not a story about the pandemic and not a story about coronavirus or anyone getting sick. It's about 2 people experiencing lockdown together. And I think by the time readers get to the end of the book, they won't even think it is a lockdown book. That is merely the jumping off point. So eventually I came clean to my publishers and said, I've been sneaking this other book. I've stopped writing the one I told you I was going to write. What do you think? Can I keep going? And to their credit, they said, yes, let's do it. So here we are.
Here we are indeed. Well, actually, having read it, I can say that if it weren't locked down, the story wouldn't work. So yeah. It isn't. The lockdown provides the background.
Yeah, and the way I think of it,
and the impetus for what happens, and yeah. It frames it, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the relationships as they develop between. Yeah. And I'm going to ask you, because my Gaelic is non-existent. Well, how do you pronounce the name of the young woman? Kira. So Kira. It's Ciara, but the C is pronounced, so it's not Italian.
Yeah.
It's Irish. Right. So Kira, right. Kira. I did a little bookstagram thing for you, and I realized as I was saying her name, I was calling her Clara.
I have heard all sorts from American readers, and I don't blame you. It doesn't look the way it sounds, but in Ireland it is Kira, as if it's Kerah.
Right. No, I get it. I get confused with Siobhan, which, I've only learned to pronounce for me and Rankin. Otherwise, I'd still be trying to figure out Siobhan. Right. I love the Irish language, but the rules of pronunciation are something you really do have to study. Or possibly you just have to be a native speaker. I think certainly if you want to speak Welsh, you almost have to be a native speaker. It's almost impossible to gargle the double L's and the whole bit the way you want to. Anyway, Oliver is the man, and Kira is the woman, and they meet in a checkout lane at Tesco, which is a large supermarket and so forth chain in the United Kingdom and obviously in Ireland. And from this chance encounter, he invites her for a coffee, she accepts, and there they are, right? And as you say, at some point, it's either separate or shack up is basically the message that you get. And, that'd be a really scary thing. I was thinking about that, Catherin, either way, that's a real risk. You either might lose a relationship because you didn't try to move forward, or you do move in together for what you don't know will be 3 weeks or 3 months or possible years.
Well, at the time, everyone was pretty much convinced it was going to be 2 weeks. Yeah. And I think, I've had some readers who are like, I would never do that. Like, I can't imagine it. But I know some people who did do it and, it worked out. So far, so good. So I think it's difficult to think back to that time and actually remember that we really did think, here in Ireland anyway, this is going to be a couple of weeks. And then we thought it was going to be 5 weeks. And then we thought the summer we'll be back to normal. And of course, every time we got to the next point, it didn't work out. So I think for Ciara and Oliver, you know, outwardly, they sort of feel like this is a risk we can take, because if it goes wrong, Ciara can just go back to her own apartment. You know, she's just staying with him. She's not actually moving in with him. She's not paying rent or, you know, dividing up bills or anything. She's just going to stay with him for a couple of weeks, she thinks.
Right. Well, I agree with you that no one at the time that this all started really envisioned how long it would go. Who of us envisioned the variant would come back and, you know, here we go again on possibly another more dangerous round. And actually there was a very scary essay by some people in one of the papers today. I can't remember. I think it was the Wall Street Journal, but to the effect that if this was actually a virus created in a lab in Wuhan, and there's some evidence that it might have been, then it's far more dangerous than we yet imagine. And there are opportunities for more variants that we can't yet perceive, because the virus would have been in fact designed to attack people in a way that a natural virus would not. So that's a happy thought for today. But anyway.
Well, funnily enough, in a previous life, I wanted to be a virologist. That was my first dream. Yeah, so I mean, I was totally not built to be a virologist, so it was just a dream. But one of the things that I found fascinating about viruses was how well designed they are to essentially wreak havoc. And the virus, this has nothing to do with my book, but the virus I was obsessed with was the Ebola virus. And when someone who has Ebola is dying, they eject bodily fluids. You know, they're having a fit and there's blood and everything. And that's because the virus knows the host is dying and this is its last chance to infect someone else. So that's what you're dealing with viruses. We all should have known way back in 2020 that we were not going to get out of this anytime soon, unfortunately.
Well, I think that I don't think we can really say that most people would have figured it out. I mean, it's clear, at least in this country, people still haven't figured out what, how to protect themselves from the virus. I mean, the mask wars are going on and on. So
I heard someone say we need to retire the phrase avoid like the plague, because it's so clear that people do not avoid the plague. So we can't use that. We can't use that phrase anymore.
But really, aside from the fact that Ciara and Oliver went into this thinking it would be short term, and as you say, where's the real harm? Because nobody's giving up anything, and then it turns out to go longer. If it weren't for the fact that it goes longer, then what happens in the book can't happen. It wouldn't have happened in like 2 weeks. So the virus was your friend in that respect.
It absolutely was. And, the way I describe it is that I would probably have written a version of this story eventually. And in my fictional universe, Ciara and Oliver would have met in that supermarket queue. But lockdown gave the three of us the opportunity for it to happen this way. And I think this was the best way, ultimately.
So stories just exist and writers are there to write them down. I mean, that's a whole theory of writing, is that all these stories
don't normally go in for that, but I will on this occasion.
Well, I've always thought it was a nice theory, but in any case, but what happens is when the book opens, we are in this rather posh apartment complex where Oliver lives, and something is clearly wrong. There is.
It's not a spoiler to say there's a dead body in the apartment.
Right.
And then we flash back.
Yeah. So then you go back to 56 days, which is why the book was called this. And you move forward. You move 56 days. You're also in the present, but then at some point you're in, 32 days? There's different times. But what you've done really well, Catherin, and which I think the reader will really admire, is that even though you've got some different time frames where the story is happening, the whole thing flows forward in a really great way. You don't feel like you're tick-tocking back between today and 56 days, but it's all kind of like one story stream. And so it's not hard to follow and it's not interrupted, which I find some of the TikTok books to be really annoying. Well, I do, you know, where you're here and then you're there. And
I mean, I can relate. I have read somewhere I felt like I had chronological whiplash because I was going like back and forth so much. But I think with this one, I really, you know, I tried to sort of establish a rhythm almost early on, so that when there was a little jump, the reader was safe in the knowledge that, you know, it was going in the same direction and they would be back to the main storyline soon. But I love that structure because, you know, you start off in the present day, which in the novel is the 1st of May, 2020, and then you go back to 56 days ago. And in the present, like we said, there's a dead body. 56 days ago, this couple is having like a Hollywood meet cute, sparks are flying, you know, something is beginning. And I wanted the reader to say to themselves, you know, what the hell happened in the space of 56 days for things to go so wrong? And I think that's the huge like narrative payoff that you get from a structure like that. You're almost borrowing the drama of the end and putting it at the beginning. And I just love that kind of book as a reader. So I tried to recreate it as a writer.
Well, you did very well. And of course, it ups the curiosity factor because the reader then, you know, the entire time is going, well, who was the body?
What's going on?
Why was it there? The other thing that makes this different is it's the same characters. So sometimes in a 2 time frame book, you have people who are in the past and their story, and then you have people in the present trying to work, and you know, there's a causal relationship between the past and the present stories, but they are different stories with different casts of characters. Whereas this one is the same people, and it's not a large period of time. It's a, you know, compressed. So it works. I think it works extremely well, and you don't lose any propulsion in the narrative. It does keep you flipping the pages to see what happened. I'm only sorry that we can't really talk to you about how this book works out, because that's the brilliant part. And of course, we'll completely ruin it if we have a discussion about it.
This book is so difficult to talk about. I didn't think about it when I was writing it, but you can barely speak about anything except the beginning. That's because right. The one thing I will promise readers, and hopefully you'll agree with me, is that when you get to the end of the book, it ends up in a place you could not have anticipated from the opening scenes. So to say anything is a spoiler, really.
I agree entirely. I mean, as I say, we have had many a thought, my staff and I, about doing follow-up events, you know, like wait 2 or 3 months and then come back for like a book club discussion, because we can't really do justice to the book or talk a lot about why we like it so much, other than to discuss the setup. So what we do, Catherin, which is really interesting, is we wander off and have digressions. And so we talk about a lot of really interesting things that have
like
nothing to do
virus.
with the book. Right. I mean, we talk about being a tourist in Ireland, you know, all kinds of stuff. And also there are frequently, most of the time, fewer questions when we have a brand new author, because people really haven't had a chance, you know, to get to know you very well here and to raise questions about. So let's go back and talk about the difference between writing standalones and series. What draws you to a story, and are you drawn to a story that you can complete in just one novel, or do you have some sort of interest in continuing at least one of the characters' story in a subsequent book?
Yeah, so as a crime reader, I love series. Like Michael Connelly, as far as I'm concerned, Harry Bosch is a real person, and I get to visit him like once a year. Like I love reading series, but as a writer, they hold no interest to me. Hold interest for me. I like the completely blank slate every time, and every novel I've written is a standalone. I just love that challenge of starting from scratch. I would hate to be under the pressure of having to keep someone alive, or, you know, making sure they can reappear again in a later book. It just feels like each book to me is entirely a closed universe. And I do put little nods to my other books in each one, but they are all entirely standalones, and I truly cannot see myself ever changing. Like I really have now, don't drag out this interview in 10 years time when I'm doing a series, but I really have no interest in writing a series. As much as I love reading them, they're just not for me as a writer. I just love standalone.
So obviously you really enjoy world building, because in fact, if you're writing standalone novels, every novel, I mean, you know, you think of world building more with science fiction and fantasy writers, because they have to create entire universes. But the truth is, if you're writing a thriller like 56 Days, you're basically, even though Dublin, central Dublin is real, and some of the background events are real, you're still doing world building and creating characters. And so you must like that challenge.
Yeah, I just love, like, I mean, this is my dream job. There's no part of it I don't like. I like working in my pajamas. I like getting to watch Netflix during the day, you know. I love being a writer. And my favorite part is the building. You know, it's the story, the architecture of the story. It's the layering in the complexity. And, you know, if I had a series, like, as you say, a lot of that is done. Like, you're almost coming into the middle of the world every time you start a book. And I prefer to kind of start from the outside in again, every novel. So I really enjoy it.
Well, the other advantage to writing a standalone is that every character in it can be at risk. If you're writing a series, you know, the one thing we know is Harry Bosch is going to, well, so far, is going to make
I will be devastated if anything ever happens to Harry Bosch. So I hope the last time we see him, he's like walking off into the sunset or something, because I couldn't face anything happening.
Well, he's currently mentoring Renee Ballard, who's a young woman, because Michael made a decision to age Harry in real time, which Ian Rankin made the same decision with Rebus. And unfortunately, that does mean that at some point, these characters really do age out to the, you know, they're not physically able to maintain some of the qualities that they need to be investigators and so forth. I mean, there's a question that comes up with many author events, and you know, everybody has to. The other choice was like Sue Grafton keeping Kinsey Milhone in the 1980s when she started it, but by the time she got to Y, which was tragically the last we didn't get see, they'd become historical novels, because you know, she was still there, not wanting to do technology and so forth. So it's a complex.
These are all things I don't have to worry about. It's
no,
great.
no, you duck them all. And as we read it, we really don't know. Is Oliver going to survive? Is Kira going to survive? Is this some stranger that's wandered into the, you know, the reader has no safety net when meeting the characters, because any of them can exit, can turn bad, could do all kinds of things can happen. Yep. So fun for you, and actually fun for us. I do think that thrillers adapt well to that structure. It's harder to do that if you want to write police procedurals or something of that nature.
That's the other aspect of series, is that they often are procedurals. And the big thing for me, like anyone who has read as of tomorrow, all 5 of my books, they are totally different from one another structurally. So each time, I think I've only written one like linear story, and that was my first, my debut, Distress Signals. So Rewind, which was my 3rd novel, it actually started in the middle and then it skipped back and forth. It was supposed to be like you were watching a video out of order and you could only put everything together at the end. And my last book, The Nothing Man, was half a true crime memoir that I made up and half the killer's reaction to it as he reads. So you and the killer were reading the book about him at the same time. So I don't just sit down and write this thing happened, then the next thing, which is often how a procedural has to go. It wouldn't make much sense otherwise. So I think that's a huge part of it for me, is that, you know, I always do something with the structure of how the story is told. And I think I'd feel really confined and constricted if I was trying to write a series, because there has to be a uniformity in a series to some extent.
So for you to gain the expertise to write like that, you must be, 1, a great reader yourself, but 2, did you have any sort of training or instruction or mentoring in writing?
I mean, not really. Like, this is kind of, so basically, let me put it this way. For 10 years, from probably when I was like 18 to 28, I was obsessed with being a writer. So I went to all the seminars and I read all the books and I stalked all the authors at events. But I never actually did any writing. I left that bit out. For some reason, I thought that was the least important part of getting published. And then when I finally came to my senses and actually sat down and wrote something, I realized that I had essentially wasted my time, because you will never learn what you need to know outside of the act of writing. It's writing the book, even if it's a book that never sees the light of day, even if it's a book that you don't finish, that's where you learn how to do it. And of course, being a reader is the most important part of it. Like, I was always a voracious reader since I was a child. You know, my mom bringing me to the library, and I think I was trying to write before I even could spell properly. You know, I would tell stories to my teddies and stuff like that. So it's just always been reading. And then aside from my little stalking writers period, like actually writing. And I think even just looking at the books myself, I can see such a, you know, a progress, if you like, from the debut to this one, which I learned through doing. So I haven't had any, you know, I didn't, like, I know doing an MFA is a big thing for writers in the States, and we certainly have MAs here that you can do if you want to go to a university level and learn how to write. And I teach courses myself sometimes, and I think they do have their place. It's wonderful to just be around other people who want the same thing you do, because saying you want to be a published writer is kind of like saying, you know, I want to be a Hollywood actor, or I want to be a pop star. You know, there's not everyone around you is saying the same thing. So I think they have their place, but I would urge anyone out there who wants to get published to forget the books and the workshops and all that and sit down and write. And once you have the book written, you can go back and do the workshops and all that, but you need to write first.
Well, my own theory is you can't be a writer if you're not a reader.
I totally agree.
I
100% agree. If you are not a reader, you will only waste your time and whoever you send your book to if you write one. It's like saying, I want to be a chef, but I don't eat food. I live off protein shakes. Like, it's just not, it's not workable. It's not going to happen. So reading is the most important thing. I totally agree.
So you mentioned Michael Connelly, and remind me, I'll tell you a funny Dublin story about Michael Connelly in a minute. But what
involve me stalking him?
No. Actually, I'll tell you right now, because it really was fun. My younger daughter and I were on a cross-Atlantic cruise, and after it leaves France, having gone from Boston all the way to Norway and all, and come down to France, we come back up and we are in Dublin. And we've had a great day. We've taken, you know, the bus. We've been to the prison. We've been to the Guinness Brewery. We've been to the cathedral. We've walked along the River Liffey. We've done the whole bit. And it's late in the day, and we have just managed to get into the Writers' Museum in Dublin, which at that time, a few years back, was kind of like an old house, you know. And we come, and then we suddenly realize, oops, the ship is going to sail. Oh dear. and we have to get back, and it's too far to walk to the docks. And so we need a taxi. And I realize as we're hailing the taxi that I have totally run out of cash. I mean, I have no money at this point from doing this heavy touring all day.
I'm feeling very stressed listening to this.
Well, you know, so we settle down into the taxi, and as I opened my mouth to say to the guy, I hope you could take a credit card or something, I observed that on the seat cover up is a Michael Connelly novel. So so I say to him, you're a Michael Connelly fan? Yes, he says, you know, and I said, well, he's an author that, because I own a bookstore. And I said, we have actually had events with Michael for every one of his books. He has been to see us at the Poison Pen and signed all of his books, except for last year when we had to ship them to him. And what can I tell you about him? I said, and the guy kind of looks at me. And I thought, I'm establishing my credentials here. So when I
Yeah.
see you, I need to give you a credit card or whatever, or
Yeah.
wait here while I run on the ship. He won't. So it was great. He was so excited. He asked me to take a photo. I have a photo of him, which I sent to Michael, where he's holding it up, and the window of the taxi is behind him and the whole bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, when we get to the dock, he said, this has been so enjoyable. He said, I'm not going to charge you. So my daughter and I shook out whatever little tiny bits of, change, whatever we had, and gave them over. And
I do have to tell you, Barbara, that my debut novel was about a serial killer on a cruise ship and about how maritime law really facilitates murderers. So just as well you
yes, well, you're absolutely right. Actually, a cruise ship can be a very high crime, very high crime area. And I never recommend that anybody go on a cruise by themselves. And that
me too, after my research, I would also
just like hiking, you shouldn't be out alone on a big ship, because bad things can happen. But anyway, it's just that Michael has been very useful. I've this come up on airplanes and somewhere in Sweden and other places, but it's true. I mean, we actually had his very first ever book event at the Poison Pen, and we're looking forward to seeing him in November.
Well, I wandered into like a sort of bargain basement store that sells remainders when I was, I think, 15. It was probably 1998, 99. And because those were the only books I could afford because I was a teenager. And I got a copy. I picked up Void Moon because it was in really good condition, this book. And ever since then, I have been obsessed with him. And no matter where I am in the world, I buy the new book on the day it comes out. I go straight home, I read it all in one sitting, and then I regret it because I have to wait for, another book. And I've never met him because I am too afraid that I would be like crazy.
Oh. Well, I'll bet we could work something out for you. Don't worry.
Please don't, because I will be arrested.
Well, oh dear. Well, so my question before I got sidelined with my taxi story with Michael, which is actually not as fun as my airline story with Michael, but we're not doing that one, is who else do you read that you have particularly admired or recommend?
I think probably he and Tana French would be my two, what Instagrammers say now are their auto-buy authors. Like, no matter what the book is, no matter what the premise, I don't even check. I just buy the book. But I am really, and I think this is a reflection of the books I write, I seem to have more of a list of novels that I've enjoyed rather than series authors. I mean, I was obsessed with Patricia Cornwell. I've had a Harlan Coben obsession. I keep using the word obsession. It's just that I really like the books. I did meet Harlan Coben and I did make a show of myself. So, that doesn't bode well for I couldn't speak. I was so giddy. It was in Paris in 2006. And I went with my friend and my friend had to talk to him because I was just like, I can't believe that's Harlan Coben. So I shouldn't meet other authors really. But like novels I've enjoyed this summer, because I've actually managed to do some reading, like Dream Girl by Laura Lippman is one of the best books I've read this summer, because I love books about writers and I love books that have a bit of, an experiment to them or are self-referential, and her writing is so wonderful. And of course, our own Liz Nugent. I don't know if you've read her books, but she'd be a friend of mine anyway, but I love her novels as well. And we have so many amazing Irish female crime writers that, if you like what we're writing, like, you are spoiled for choice by the number of us that are in. Jane Casey is another absolutely superb author. Andrea Carter, another friend of mine, her books are published in the States, and she sets her books in a showing up in the north in Donegal. And it's just, incredibly atmospheric and mysterious. And again, wonderful prose. So I read basically a lot of my friends because the Irish crime writing community wonderfully is a community, and a lot of us know each other and, support each other. And of course, go to the bar after events when we were allowed to go to events, which hopefully will return soon. So Yeah, I do read quite widely, but I do call Michael Connelly my God amongst men, and you can't see it, but back here I have a framed picture of the Garden of Earthly Delights, a framed print from the Prado, because my favorite novel of his is A Darkness More Than Night, and it features that print. So I'm really totally going to get arrested after all this Michael Connelly talk.
No, not at all. You know, I mean, anyone who reads Michael Connelly knows about Hieronymus and, you know, all the rest of it. Bosch, actually, my husband and I have visited his paintings, particularly in Germany. You know, kind of as a little.
I have been to Madrid, is the only place I've seen. They had the triptych at the time, but yeah, so amazing. I love it. It
is. It was a brilliant stroke, I think, to pick, you know, that name. And I just heard today that they have finished filming The Lincoln Lawyer, the new TV series.
Oh, yeah, I'm so excited. I thought the movie was amazing, so hopefully the TV series will be too.
Well, I liked it too, and it won't be the same, of course, with the different cast, but there's some excellent books in there, and then there'll be a spin-off of Bosch, so you know, more to come. We'll see how that goes. Right, so I know there was something else I was going to ask you brilliantly, but I can't think of what it was. Patrick, you want to come up from the dark and see if we have any customer questions, or weigh in on Irish writers, since you know them better than I do?
Well, I was saying we should have Catherin join us and guest host our Michael Connelly event coming up.
We could do that.
Or have you chime in.
I mean, I wouldn't be able.
As long as you didn't go all Kathy Bates on us.
That's what I'm afraid of, honestly, because I have been reading him for so long that, like, you know, I just think he's amazing. So
he's such a nice, kind of humble, unassuming guy. You know, doesn't come across as really impressed with himself. You'd love him.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
He's
Anytime you meet other crime writers at festivals and stuff who have met him, they all say exactly this. This is basically the Michael Connelly Appreciation Society this evening.
I've never.
Well, he has Irish roots, so it's only fair that we actually do that. I would throw in that my husband and I have been watching a lot of serial crime on television. Have watched John Banville. They've done 4, I think, of Quirk. And now I see that he's, and he wrote them, of course, as Benjamin Black rather than John Banville. But it looked to me, Patrick, like he has a book coming out soon, another Quirk. And this time he's got his own name on. I mean, he's not writing it as Benjamin Black. He's actually writing it as Banville. They're quite dark. I have to say, watching the TV, it was sort of like watching Mad Men. I forgot that everybody smoked all the time and drank way too much. And so in a way, it's kind of irritating, and you want to say to Quirk, you know, stop, you know, just stop. But on the other hand, it's the 1950s. And so to be authentic, you know, there we are. But it's a very different feeling reading Banville than Tana French today, or you, or, you know, I love John Connelly, but his books are mostly set, you know, in the US with Charlie Parker. Who else, Patrick, are we thinking about?
Oh, there's so many. You know, Stuart Neville.
Yeah.
In the North, Adrian McKinty, who does that great series, Sean Duffy series.
He does. Actually, Stuart's going to be with us on September 7th, talking to Patrick about a new book set in Belfast, right? Stuart.
Right.
I'm sorry, and I interrupted you. Who else?
No, I'm just trying to think myself. Brian McGilloway.
Yeah.
That series was it up in Sligo, Catherin? Something like that?
I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, I just did an event with Brian like before a couple of months ago, so I should know that. But
I know some of them.
It sounds like it could be right, but it might be a little bit. No, maybe it is Sligo, actually, come to think of it. Sorry, Brian, if we have got the county wrong, but there's a lot of counties here, so.
Ken Bruin, of course, in Galway.
Yeah.
There's loads of them. Eva, is it Dolan? Eva Dolan, is that right?
I think she's British.
She is British. Yeah, Jane Casey is who you're thinking about. But I'm trying to remember, Jane's books are set in England, aren't they? Rather, I just read one.
They are, yeah. Yeah.
So she may be an Irish writer, but I think she writes a British series, or she wrote a British policing series. And then there's historical Ireland. There's Peter Tremaine, actually Peter Barrowford Ellis, who's an historian. I just exchanged emails with him the other day. he's working on his, I think, 35th Sister Fidelma, which is 6th century, I think, Ireland, set in Cashel. And there was a woman who wrote a number of books set in the Burren, and they were medieval also, but I'm going blank on her name. But medieval Ireland is a really interesting, period to write about. And there've been a couple Elizabethan, when the British came and all that kind of thing, and other stuff. Patrick, there's even Bob Parker wrote a couple of at least one or two Irish books. I think he was interested in in 1920, and remember they're not Spencers or anything. I can't recall. There are two of them.
Weren't they
I
Irish?
can't recall the titles, but
Irish
they're
American kind of Irish American, really, right?
Well, yeah, but one of them actually starts and mostly takes place in Ireland before they come to Boston. Okay. I could look it up, but so
I think Ireland is like Iceland. We have very little crime and a load of crime fiction.
That's a really good analogy, right? But yeah.
And I'm glad that's the way it goes, that it's not the other way around. But it is funny because, like, certainly I think 2 of my books at least have serial killers in them. Ireland has only ever had one confirmed serial killer. I always use the example that it's apparently the same size as the state of Indiana. So you can imagine trying to be a serial killer in such a small geographical space. And also, like, we joke about it, but everyone does know everyone. Like, I'm living in a city 2.5 hours drive from where my parents live. And I moved to a new area. Went out for a walk one morning, and I come home and I get a phone call from my mom. I heard you were out walking this morning, because someone she knows saw me and told her, like, you can't be a serial killer here. You just wouldn't get away with it. So
it's an awful warning right now to a serial killer, right? Don't go to Ireland.
You won't get to the serial bit. I'm sorry, you won't.
You just find him down at the pub, right?
It's literally, the guards would just be like, "Did you see?" And they'd be like, "He'd be over there in the corner. You can go, you can go arrest him."
I have a question or two here from our audience. Debbie, she has a few questions packed in here.
Okay.
Do you do a lot of research for your novels, is one, and then how do you go about developing your ideas? Do you people watch? Are you always eavesdropping on strangers? Are your antenna always out there for stories and dialogue and all that good stuff?
Okay, well, first of all, oh my God, what was the first part of the question?
Okay, sorry about research, right?
Yeah, so I abhor research and I try and avoid it as much as possible, which is another reason why I wouldn't do a procedural series. I prefer write what you know, in the sense that you should use what you know. So I always put like a little bit of the knowledge I do have into the book. So, like, for instance, the first book, which was set on a cruise ship, I have never been to date on a cruise ship, but I did work in a hotel in Walt Disney World as a housekeeping supervisor. And there's no difference really between cleaning hotel rooms and cleaning cabins. So I made my character on the cruise ship a cabin attendant, a housekeeper, and used that. So I tend to do a lot of that, kind of repurposing real things from my life. I do work with a member of Garda Síochána, with the Irish police, who reads my manuscripts and says that would never happen, or look, we can pretend that would happen. It's a bit of a stretch, but you can put it in there. But I am firmly of the belief, and this is the hill I will die on, that it's fiction. It's called fiction for a reason. It's not a documentary. And if crime fiction was actually accurate, there would have to be 300 pages in the middle where someone is waiting for DNA results to come back, because they take months. So I feel like my obligation is to make the book feel true, but not necessarily be accurate. I think those are two different things. As for developing my story, I don't eavesdrop on people. Oh my God, I would never. I do all the time. But what I normally do with my ideas is they really do come to me quite fully formed. So far, apart from Lockdown novel, which came from my own lockdown experience, I tend to take little tidbits from real life cases or something I hear. my third novel, Rewind, was inspired by, or sparked rather, by a Post Secret image, which is a community art project, is the best way to describe it, where people write their deepest, darkest secrets on a postcard and mail them to a man in the United States called Frank Warren. And the secret I saw was a picture of a bedroom, and it said, "I trade hidden sex videos with other Airbnb hosts." And I was like, oh my God, like what if you were doing that and you captured a murder? And that's where the idea for Rewind came from. So I don't really have to build up ideas, because when they sort of merge in my head, they're kind of fully there already. And then it's just a case of writing it down.
Let's see, another question. Let's see, this is from Daniel. He says, do you have a favorite book that you've read this year?
Ooh, I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite book this year. I loved Northern Spy by Flynn Berry. I said at the time, like, if she published a shopping list, I would pre-order it. I have loved everything she's written, and I find it remarkable that she is American and she can write about Ireland and previously England in the way that she can. So I absolutely loved that. I also loved Bathhouse by PJ Vernon. I feel like I'm mentioning that in every event I do, and he'll probably think I'm stalking him as well, but a really amazing book. And as I mentioned, Laura Lippman's Dream Girl, I absolutely loved that as well. It's been a good year for reading. It's hard to actually just pick one, but I think maybe Northern Spy is the one that kind of lingered with me the most, and the one I'm still thinking about, even though I read it a month ago.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. We did a wonderful event. Actually, we did our book launch. When was it, Patrick? Back in February, or was it January? I was wild about her previous book, the one set in
Love
England.
them.
With, yeah, I thought it was just wonderful, and I really, I agree with you that I think that this new book was really remarkable, and the ethical choices and the other. What does it mean to be, being a spy? If you are a spy, what does all that mean? Truly remarkable. She's
for the last few years, I'll
send you the link to the video, because you probably enjoy watching it.
Love to watch it, because I read Under the Harrow. I don't even remember how I heard about it or how I saw it, but I read it shortly after it came out, and I have been saying to everyone since then, you need to be reading her. So I was so delighted that Northern Spy was picked, I think, by Reese Witherspoon's club, because now she seems to be getting a lot more attention, and I hope that more people here in Ireland will read her work as they are doing already in the States. So
I hope so too. She's not a book a year kind of author. She's a thoughtful author and a bit slower than many writers. I think Northern Spy, wasn't that just her third book, Patrick?
Her third, yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah. Was A Double Life the one in between?
Yes, and that was the one about Lord Lucan, which I thought was a fabulous, riff on that story, a real story. But what would be?
Like I said, if she published her shopping list, I would read it.
Let's see. Somebody's asking, what's Catherin working on now?
Okay, so my next book, because I am on a book a year, or trying to be. So hopefully next summer, book 6 will be out, and it's set on the set of a movie set. And again, like, it was inspired by a real thing. My brother is an actor, and a few years ago, he was in this Irish independent horror movie called Beyond the Woods. And it was filmed in a secluded house out in the Irish countryside at night, because it was a horror movie. And he told me that one of the first things they had to do when they arrived on set was to go to the local Garda station and say, if you get a call in the middle of the night that says, I'm hearing screams, someone is being murdered in the woods, don't worry, it's just us filming. And I immediately thought, if you wanted screams to be ignored because you were up to something worse than filming a movie, this might be a good cover for it. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and hopefully it will be out next year.
Sounds great.
I can see how ideas come to you. I mean, because if Yeah, that's the difference oftentimes between writers and everybody else, is that most people would hear that story and not give it a lot of thought. But a writer goes, wait, here's an excellent opportunity for a crime. And I mean, really, it's just a difference in how people's minds work.
Yeah.
Let's see. That's really about it as far as actual questions.
Okay. Well, in that case, Catherin, it has really been a pleasure to talk to you. I truly recommend 56 Days for reasons that, unfortunately, in part, we can't talk about. But the writing is wonderful. The characters are truly vivid. If you are a Tana French reader and you want to spend more time in Dublin, for example, or if you read John Banville in 1950s Dublin, doesn't do it for you, but modern version would. This is a wonderful book to read, and basically that's all we can tell you. But I want to thank you for signing copies for us, which we very much appreciate, and your publisher Blackstone for making those available. So we'll be in touch. I'll send you a video link to Flynn and also to Michael, and he's really not scary. Maybe we can.
No, but I am, so.
You're really too terrified to meet him, huh?
I might scare him, yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes people don't want to meet their favorite authors for fear of being disappointed. But as Patrick has already pointed out, and you have mentioned, nobody's ever been disappointed meeting Michael. He's exactly who you think he is and who he ought to be and who you imagine him to be. So it's never a disappointment. We can't say that about every writer.
I've never heard anybody say a negative word about Michael.
No,
that's saying
yeah.
No, but he's not some Pollyanna kind of guy either.
He's not real like he's fuzzy,
Yeah, well, he's a really good person, and it comes through, in a way. And Harlan's a lot of fun. He's going to be doing an event with us in a couple of weeks, and Harlan is, to my knowledge, never at a loss for words. I have never found Harlan to be at a loss for words, and he's always funny. But he too is usually very generous to other writers and kind, and has a busy family, and he's a lot of fun. So you've picked some very nice writers. I'm so jealous
of you getting to meet all these like amazing writers just in the course of your, normal business. Must be fun.
31 years in, we have most of today's writers. We've been lucky that we have met them early on, or we get to meet them now. And I will say that the pandemic and Zoom has allowed us to meet writers and do things with writers like Catherin, who might not have been over here from Dublin in a previous, let's go back to like 2019. And so it has been a chance for us to really expand our circle of authors and our circle of customers. So we ship books all over the world every day. And,
So if anyone in Ireland who's watching who wants one of those lovely pink signed books, they can potentially get it from the Poison Pen.
They can indeed, but they need to ask for a shipping quote, because unfortunately books don't swim. And I have to say, and it's nothing we can do about it, but the rates. This I will say, if you decide you want to order a book from the Poison Pen, you're way better off to order several books, because the first one is a killer for shipping, but after that, it's a very small increment. So if you're going to, or the Outlander bookstore, and those are big and heavy books, and they go all over the world every day. And I am frequently amazed at what people pay for it. But at the same time, you can see that 8 books is a way better bargain than 1 book if you're going to be shipping.
And buying 8 books is so much more fun than just buying 1. So
it is. But it's just the way it is. Anyway, Catherin, thank you for your time. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Don't forget to buy an autographed copy of 56 Days while you can. And bye.
Thank you. Bye.